Tanzania woke to a morning that felt heavier than usual. The sky over Dar es Salaam was gray, thick with the smoke of burning tires, and the distant wail of sirens slashed through the air. Streets that had once hummed with the rhythm of daily life were now transformed into battlegrounds. Shops were shuttered, vehicles abandoned in the middle of clogged avenues, and the normally bustling harbor lay eerily silent. The country was holding its breath, waiting for a spark, and then, like a wildfire, that spark ignited. It started in the northern city of Arusha, where thousands of citizens had gathered to protest rising living costs, corruption, and a series of controversial political decrees that had angered the populace. Videos, once streamed freely, had captured the protests' fervor, the chants, the defiance, the raw courage. But now, in a decisive move that sent shockwaves across the nation, the president had ordered a nationwide internet shutdown. Phones went dead. Social media froze. WhatsApp messages failed to deliver. In an instant, Tanzania was cut off from the digital world, silencing voices that had just begun to roar. For Amani, a 28-year-old teacher in Dar es Salaam, the news was a punch to the gut. She had been posting live updates from her phone, capturing the stories of ordinary citizens, students, market traders, and laborers, standing defiantly against the tide of government oppression. When the screen went black, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. Alone in her cramped apartment, she realized that she was no longer just reporting. She was witnessing history in real time, and history had suddenly turned against them. Meanwhile, across the city in Kariakoo Market, Jamal, a young vendor, tried desperately to reach his brother in Mwanza. His phone displayed nothing but the harsh message, "No network." Panic flickered in his eyes. The market, once filled with the vibrant chatter of bartering, had grown tense. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said the army would march on the streets of Dar es Salaam within hours. Others whispered that the government had already called in foreign advisors to restore order. The internet blackout created chaos that was palpable. Even the news channels struggled to report, their feeds interrupted, their journalists detained or blocked from reaching the protest zones. Radio became the only lifeline for information, but its reach was limited, and misinformation spread like wildfire. In a country that had embraced technology and connectivity over the past decade, the sudden absence of the digital world left citizens disoriented and angry. In the heart of Dodoma, the political capital, President Hamasim Beki convened an emergency council meeting. The room was filled with tension, the kind that could suffocate. Military generals flanked the long mahogany table, their faces carved in stone. Intelligence officers whispered into earpieces, feeding updates about protest clusters spreading from Mwanza to Mbeya. The president, a man whose charisma had once inspired hope, now radiated determination tinged with fear. He understood that the protests were more than just economic dissent. They were a challenge to his authority, and with the country's future hanging in the balance, he was willing to go to any lengths to maintain control. Meanwhile, the streets were becoming a war zone. In Arusha, thousands had refused to disperse, marching with banners and chants demanding accountability. The army moved in, armored vehicles rolling down the avenues, their lights slicing through the smoke. Tear gas canisters exploded with thunderous crackles, sending waves of white mist into the crowds. Amani, braving the chaos with her camera hidden under her shawl, captured the scene. Mothers shielding children, young men forming human chains to protect the vulnerable, and elders chanting prayers of resilience amid the turmoil. In Mwanza, a port city on the shores of Lake Victoria, the protests had taken a different form. Students had barricaded themselves in the university campus, determined to make their voices heard. Food supplies ran low, but determination ran higher. Among them was Farida, a 21-year-old law student who had once dreamed of a peaceful career in human rights. Now, she was a frontline witness to a struggle that was bigger than herself. She coordinated with other students to deliver food and water, patched wounds from tear gas, and chronicled the events in handwritten notes since digital devices were useless. Her notebook became a lifeline for future historians, a record of courage in the face of oppression. As the day progressed, reports began filtering through underground channels that the protests were spreading to more rural towns. Even in the remote village of Makete, residents blocked the main highway, refusing to let vehicles pass until their demands were addressed. Farmers and traders joined hands, their anger fueled by years of neglect and broken promises. The president's strategy of digital blackout was proving a double-edged sword. While it disrupted communication between protest groups in the cities, it also amplified fear and frustration, pushing citizens to act in decentralized, unpredictable ways. The international community watched in shock. Neighboring Kenya and Uganda issued cautious statements, urging calm and dialogue, while foreign embassies scrambled to evacuate staff and assess risks. Analysts predicted that the unrest in Tanzania could destabilize the East African region, impacting trade, investment, and security. Foreign media painted a picture of a nation on the brink of chaos, a story fueled by scarce information and rampant speculation. In the capital, the president faced a dilemma. Military action could restore order temporarily, but it risked escalating violence and drawing condemnation. At the same time, calls from opposition leaders and civil society groups grew louder, demanding the restoration of the internet and an end to repression. In the shadows of his mansion, the president knew that history was watching. Every decision carried weight. Every delay was a risk. Back in Dar es Salaam, Amani found herself trapped in a side street as soldiers pushed forward. Tear gas burned her lungs, but she refused to retreat. She saw an elderly man collapse. An instinct took over. She dragged him to safety, ignoring the chaos around her. Nearby, Jamal, the vendor, had joined a group forming human barricades to protect civilians from advancing armored vehicles. Their faces were streaked with dust, sweat, and smoke. Yet their eyes reflected a defiant spark, a refusal to surrender to fear. The night fell, and the city transformed. Fires from torched vehicles painted the streets with an orange glow, and helicopters hovered overhead like vultures circling their prey. Communication remained cut, leaving families terrified for one another. Amani's camera, now recording silently, captured moments that felt eternal. A mother comforting her child as sirens screamed, a young man lifting another to safety over a barricade, and a university student quietly praying amid the roar of violence. In Dodoma, intelligence reports indicated that external powers were quietly watching, and in some cases, maneuvering. Rumors circulated of covert meetings between foreign diplomats and opposition leaders, whispering strategies and contingency plans. The president was acutely aware that any violent suppression would be scrutinized on the global stage, risking sanctions and diplomatic isolation. The stakes were higher than ever. Tanzania was no longer just an internal affair. It was a symbol of resistance, governance, and African sovereignty under pressure. By the second day, the protests had evolved. Citizens had learned to communicate without the internet, using messengers, handwritten flyers, and even coded signals. Small communities coordinated in decentralized networks, evading military checkpoints. In Moshi, near Mount Kilimanjaro, villagers used church bells to signal the start of peaceful demonstrations, while in Iringa, students held silent marches with candles in hand, the light a beacon of resilience. Amidst the chaos, stories of humanity emerged. Jamal found a young boy separated from his family and carried him across streets filled with smoke. Farida stitched wounds on students in the university infirmary, her hands shaking but her resolve unbroken. Amani, despite exhaustion, continued filming, knowing that when the internet returned, her footage would tell the story the world needed to see. The government's heavy-handed response drew condemnation from global human rights organizations. Satellite images, smuggled to news outlets abroad, showed streets littered with debris, armored vehicles, and crowds that refused to disperse. Analysts debated the consequences. Tanzania's economy teetered, foreign investment stalled, and the East African community called for an emergency summit to prevent regional destabilization. On the third day, a turning point arrived. Rumors of defections within the military reached the president. Soldiers, many unwilling to fire on their fellow citizens, hesitated, allowing protesters to reclaim streets they had previously lost. Social media remained offline, but word-of-mouth stories spread like wildfire, emboldening more citizens to rise. The country's pulse had shifted. Fear had been replaced with defiance. In Dar es Salaam, Amani joined a massive march near the city center. She filmed as thousands of citizens, united across age, gender, and social status, marched shoulder to shoulder. The chants were deafening. calls for accountability, freedom, and dignity. The government's attempts at control had inadvertently forged unity among the populace. By the fourth day, international pressure mounted. Embassies issued formal warnings. The UN urged immediate restoration of communication channels, and economic partners threatened sanctions. The president faced a historic choice: escalate violence and risk mass bloodshed, or begin dialogue and risk perceived weakness. In a rare address broadcast on state television, the president announced a partial restoration of the internet and pledged to meet with opposition leaders. While cautious, citizens took this as a victory, a testament to the power of collective action. Across the nation, celebrations erupted, not with revelry, but with quiet relief, gratitude, and vigilance. People knew the struggle was far from over, but a line had been crossed. Their voices could not be entirely silenced. The protests left scars, visible and invisible. Streets bore the marks of chaos. Families grieved lost loved ones. Trust between the government and citizens was fractured. Yet, amid the ruins, stories of courage endured. Amani's footage would later circulate widely once connectivity returned, documenting the bravery of ordinary Tanzanians who dared to challenge fear. Farida's handwritten chronicles would inspire a generation. Jamal's acts of kindness became a symbol of humanity in the face of turmoil. The events in Tanzania resonated far beyond its borders. Regional leaders realized that civic unrest in one nation could ignite waves across the continent. The Tanzanian people had shown that resilience, unity, and courage could challenge even the most restrictive measures. Their struggle became a lesson, a warning, and a beacon for other nations grappling with governance, accountability, and freedom in the digital age. By the end, the country began to rebuild. The government, wary and constrained, initiated dialogues and minor reforms, though skepticism remained. Citizens returned to daily life, forever changed by the 4 days when streets turned into theaters of defiance and the nation learned the potency of its collective voice. Tanzania had erupted, the fires had burned, and in the ashes, a new understanding of power, courage, and unity had emerged. Amani, Farida, Jamal, and countless unnamed heroes had witnessed the impossible, a nation speaking as one, refusing to be silenced, and demanding its destiny be shaped by its people, not by fear, repression, or silence.